It started with 12 words. 12 quiet, deliberate words that tore through the illusion of love. Evan, I want a divorce and $500 million. I'm done pretending. She said it as if she were ordering coffee. Calm. Precise. Unshaken. No tears. No hesitation. Just a simple declaration that split his world in two. Evan Cole didn't speak at first. He blinked once. Twice. Trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. For a moment, he thought it was a joke, some twisted test of loyalty or strength. But when he looked up and met her eyes, he saw no softness there. Only calculation. There's a silence that follows betrayal. It's not loud or dramatic. It's the kind of silence that hums in your bones cold. Sterile. Final. She sat across from him at the marble table they'd chosen together. Perfectly composed in her white silk blouse. The woman he once thought was his piece now looked like a stranger rehearsing a performance she'd perfected in her head. Evan finally spoke. Voice low. Steady. 500 million. He repeated, almost to himself. That's a very specific number. Her lips curved just slightly, not into a smile, but into a smirk. It's what I deserve, she said. After everything I've put into this marriage, 3 months. That's how long it had been since their wedding. 90 days of luxury breakfasts, smiling photographs, and a house full of quiet red flags he'd chosen to ignore. Evan leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. He'd spent years designing aircraft that could break the sound barrier. Now, sitting across from her, he realized his life had just broken the trust barrier. I see, he said softly. If that's what you want, Lily, I'll let my lawyers know. Her eyes flickered for the first time, a tiny fracture in her armor. She'd expected anger, maybe disbelief. A man shouting, begging, fighting. But not this. Not calm. Good, she said finally. Her voice clipped and rehearsed. I knew you'd understand. She stood, smoothed the crease in her skirt, and picked up her purse. The faint scent of her perfume, the one he used to love, now carried the weight of a goodbye. She walked out with a confidence that didn't belong to love, but to victory. The sound of her heels faded down the hall, and with it, the echo of the life he thought they were building together. Avon didn't chase her. He didn't call her name. He just sat there, staring at the reflection of himself in the glass wall opposite the table. The city skyline shimmered behind him, but all he could see was a man who'd been outplayed in his own home. Then something changed. A flicker behind his eyes. A quiet shift from disbelief to understanding, he whispered. Barely audible. So that's how it is. He stood, straightened his cuffs, and walked toward the window. Outside, Denver was glowing beneath a pale winter sun. The city moved on, indifferent to heartbreak, indifferent to betrayal. And in that silence, Evan made a decision not to fight her with emotion, but with reason, not to collapse, but to observe, because behind every performance, there's a pattern, and behind every pattern, a plan. He had seen the signs long before this day, the questions about his assets, the late-night calls, the sudden obsession with independence. He had ignored them, believing love could not be measured in suspicion. Now, he knew better. She thought she was in control. She thought calmness meant surrender. But Evan Cole was not a man who lost control. He was a man who recalibrated it. And as he stood there, watching the faint reflection of the woman walking out of his life, he almost smiled. Because what Lily Summers didn't know was that he had already seen this coming. And when the time came, The woman who thought she could take everything would learn what it means to lose, what truly matters. Before the storm, there was magic. 2 years earlier, long before lawyers, headlines, and silence, there had been a night that felt like destiny. A charity gala in downtown Los Angeles, gold lights, soft jazz, champagne bubbling under crystal chandeliers. That's where Evan Cole first saw her. Lily Summers. She didn't just enter a room, she claimed it. Every camera seemed to find her. Every conversation tilted toward her laughter. She was 31. Radiant. A lifestyle influencer who had mastered the art of appearing effortless. And when her eyes met Evan's across the crowd, time paused. The kind of pause you only hear about in movies. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in signs. But that night, when she smiled slow, deliberate, disarming something inside him softened. He'd spent years building rockets that defied gravity. Yet he'd forgotten what it felt like to fall. Later, she approached him first. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying that blend of curiosity and confidence. "Only certain people are born with. I read about your company. You're trying to reach the stars. How's that going?" He laughed, a little embarrassed. "Still trying to get off the ground." She smiled. "Something tells me you already have." It was charm wrapped in admiration. The kind that made a man drop his guard. By the end of the night, she'd memorized every detail of his life, his favorite whiskey, his failed marriage, the way he spoke more easily about work than feelings. She told him he was different. "You actually have a soul, Evan. Most men with your money don't." He didn't see manipulation. He saw connection. And for a man who'd built walls of logic around his heart, Lily was the first person who made him forget they were there. Their first date turned into a weekend in Napa. Their second date became a trip to Paris. By the time summer came, the tabloids were already calling them the perfect match. The billionaire engineer and the glamorous philanthropist beauty meets brains. Passion meets purpose. When Evan proposed beneath the Eiffel Tower, the city lights reflected in her eyes like diamonds. The crowd clapped. A violinist played. Cameras flashed. He thought it was the happiest moment of his life. And maybe it was just not for the reasons he imagined. Their wedding, months later, was a masterpiece of luxury. Snow-dusted pines in Aspen. A glass chapel built for photographs, not vows. She walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like morning frost. Every detail captured by drones and magazine photographers. He couldn't stop staring. Couldn't stop believing. For the first time in years, Evan felt alive not as a CEO, not as a man who'd conquered markets, but as someone who'd been seen. Lily had a way of doing that, making a man believe he was her world. And maybe for a while, he was. But even fairy tales have warning signs. At the reception, his best friend, Tom Reeves, pulled him aside. "She's perfect," Tom said, his tone careful. "Too perfect. Sign a prenup, just in case." Evan laughed it off. Glass of champagne in hand. "Love isn't a contract," he said. "It's trust." Tom stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "Just remember that when trust turns into paperwork." Evan didn't listen. He didn't want to. Because that night, surrounded by music, laughter, and the woman he thought would rewrite his life, doubt felt like a betrayal of faith. He believed he was safe. He believed her love was pure. And somewhere in that belief, he planted the first seed of his own undoing. Years later, when the world would crumble around him, he'd remember that night, her hand in his, her whisper in his ear, "You're not like other men. Evan, you actually believe in forever." He did. And that was his mistake. Fairy tales don't shatter all at once. They crack quietly. Like thin ice under too much weight. At first, Avon didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. The woman who used to wake up early just to make coffee and talk about his day now slept in. Her phone always face down beside the bed. The laughter that once came so easily was replaced by long silences, the kind that fill a room but never say a word. It began with distance. Small. Polite distance. A new hobby here. A girl's trip there. Then came the phone calls late at night. Soft voice. Doors closed. When he'd ask who it was, she'd smile faintly and say, "Charity work." "Babe, you know how it is?" He did know. Or at least he thought he did. Lily had always been passionate about her image, the photo shoots, the fundraisers, the glamorous way she carried generosity like an accessory. But lately, she talked less about causes and more about contracts. One evening, while they were having dinner, she casually asked, "How much is your company worth now?" Evan looked up from his plate, fork halfway to his mouth. She said it lightly, like it was small talk. He smiled politely. "It's doing fine." But her eyes didn't move away. They studied him. Calculating. Patient. Finally, she said, "I mean, roughly, I never asked before. But it must be billions by now." "Right," he shrugged. "It's not about the number." She leaned back, her lips curving. "Everything's about numbers." Evan. That was the first time he felt it, the strange, quiet disconnection between her voice and her heart. The woman who once asked about his dreams was now auditing his life. After that, her curiosity grew sharper. She started asking about assets, properties, patents, shares, insurance, always in that same playful tone that could have fooled anyone else. But not him. Not anymore. He began to watch her differently, not as a husband watching his wife, but as a man studying a pattern he couldn't yet name. Her movements became predictable. Her mornings started later. Her messages came shorter. Her phone always locked. Sometimes, late at night, Evan would find her standing on the balcony, whispering into her phone. The city lights painted her in gold and shadow. When she noticed him, she'd end the call too quickly, sliding the phone into her robe pocket with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just Eric, from the charity." She'd say. "He's helping me with legal paperwork." Eric Legal. That was the name she used. At first, Evan believed it, or at least tried to. But the calls continued. Too many. Too long. Too careful. And her laugh, that soft, melodic laugh he used to love now, sounded like a cover story. He didn't confront her. He just observed. Because some truths had learned reveal themselves faster when you stop chasing them. It wasn't one lie. He would later say to himself, it was 100 small ones that felt almost true. He started noticing other things. She no longer touched him absent-mindedly when she walked by. She no longer asked how his projects were going. Her attention was always somewhere else, not distracted, but directed. One morning, he found her scrolling through real estate listings in silence. When he asked if she was planning to invest, she smiled and said, "Just curious." But when he leaned over to look, she quickly closed the browser. That evening, while she dressed for another fundraising dinner, he studied her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted her necklace and caught his eyes behind her. What, she asked softly. "Nothing," he said. But inside, something was changing, something quiet, cold, and final. He no longer felt confused. Hefältavere. And awareness, for a man like Evan Cole, was the first step toward preparation. Later that night, as the house lay silent, he stood by the same balcony where she took her secret calls. He looked out at the city. Listening to the faint hum of distant traffic, he didn't feel anger. He didn't feel heartbreak. Only calculation, the slow, deliberate kind that once made him successful in business. He whispered to himself, "Every pattern leaves a trace." The next morning, Lily left early, claiming a meeting with sponsors. When she was gone, Evan opened his notebook, not the kind for work, but for something more personal. He began writing down the small things, the times of her calls, the names she mentioned, the inconsistencies in her stories, not out of spite, but out of clarity, because for the first time, he was starting to see the shape of the truth behind her smile. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the calm before the reveal. The fairy tale hadn't shattered yet, but the cracks were spreading. Every betrayal has a moment of proof, not suspicion, not guessing, not good feeling. Proof. That single, cold instant when love becomes data, and faith turns into evidence. For Evan, that moment came on a quiet Thursday night. Lily was asleep. Her breathing was slow, steady, almost peaceful, the rhythm of someone who'd stopped pretending during daylight. On her side of the bed, her tablet glowed faintly. A new email notification blinked. He didn't mean to look, not at first, but something inside him, that quiet, rational instinct that had guided every decision of his life, whispered, "Now." He reached for the tablet. Her password was the same as always, her birthday. Reversed. It unlocked easily. The inbox was a maze of half-truths and hidden folders. And then he found it, a thread of emails, marked private strategy discussion. The sender, Eric Dawson, her charity lawyer. The first line made his stomach turn cold. "Once the divorce is filed, we'll claim emotional neglect. Demand $500 million. He'll settle fast. He always avoids scandal." There it was, written in the same calm, professional tone Lily used when ordering floral arrangements for charity events. No affection. No hesitation. Just numbers. Strategy. Timing. Each message read like a script, instructions on how to appear hurt but dignified, how to frame the media narrative, how to say, "I tried, but he left me no choice." Evan stared at the screen for a long time. The words blurred. His hands didn't shake, they just went still. The way a machine powers down before a reboot. He could have woken her right then. He could have shouted, demanded answers, thrown everything she'd ever lied about back in her face. But instead, he whispered something else. "All right," he said softly. "Let's play." Because in that moment, pain transformed into purpose. The man who once built rockets began building something even stronger, a plan. The next morning, while Lily went to her meeting, Evan called the one person he still trusted completely, Tom Reeves. Friend. Lavier. Brother in everything but blood. When Tom answered, Evan's voice was calm. "I need your help," he said. "And I need it quiet." Tom didn't ask why. Not at first. But when Evan explained the emails, the lawyer, the plan, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Tom said, "You want to fight her?" Evan replied. "No. I want to outthink her." Over the next few weeks, the transformation began. In public, nothing changed. Lily still smiled for cameras, still hosted luncheons, still kissed his cheek for photographs. Behind closed doors, Evan Cole was rewriting his empire. With Tom's help, he quietly transferred every major asset the company shares: the properties, the patents, the art collections, into a new entity, the Cole Foundation for Innovation and Education. To the public, it looked like philanthropy, another billionaire giving back to the world. To Lily, it looked like business as usual. But on paper, Evan Cole now owned nothing. Every dollar, every piece of property, every symbol of wealth she thought she could take was now legally beyond her reach. It wasn't a spiteful move. It was precision. Evan understood something Lily never did: that power doesn't come from possession. It comes from foresight. While she schemed with lawyers over dinners she thought he didn't know about, he spent his evenings finalizing trust documents, signing under the quiet hum of his desk lamp. Each signature was a seal, one more wall between her greed and his peace. At home, he played his part. He still greeted her with a smile, still asked about her charity work. And when she lied, he let her, because silence now served him better than truth. There were moments, brief and haunting, when he'd look at her and remember the woman he once believed in, the one who laughed under Paris lights, who whispered forever against his chest. But those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. He wasn't that man anymore. And she wasn't that woman. Evan had moved from heartbreak to calculation, from victim to strategist, from love to lesson. By the time Lily kissed him goodnight and rolled over to check her phone, he was already 10 steps ahead. She thought she was playing him. She didn't realize she'd already stepped onto his chessboard. The next move was hers. But the game that already belonged to him. When you know the storm is coming, you don't shout warnings. You build stronger walls. You smile. You wait. And that's exactly what Evan Cole did. In the weeks after discovering Lily's betrayal, nothing in their home seemed to change. Dinner was still served at 7. She still greeted him with that polished smile, the one that once made him believe in forever. And he still played the part of the devoted husband. Flowers on Fridays, quiet conversations over wine, even small surprises left on her vanity. To Lily, it must have felt like victory. To Evan, it was theater. She mistook his calm for blindness. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence was just the sound of strategy. Every moment she performed love. He recorded it in memory, a meticulous ledger of false affection. Every message she sent, every receipt she hid, every late-night call she thought he didn't hear, Evan documented it all. Not out of vengeance, but out of precision. He wasn't trying to destroy her. He was simply building proof, brick by brick, file by file, until her own lies became the evidence that would collapse her world. At work, he was the same disciplined visionary. His employees always knew: decisive, composed, generous. But after hours, his focus shifted from aerospace to human psychology. He studied her the way an engineer studies pressure points, finding the fault lines that would give way when the weight of truth finally came down. Sometimes he'd sit beside her on the couch, pretending to watch a movie. While she texted under the blanket, her reflection would glow faintly in the glass of the window. Her lips would twitch with half smiles. She didn't mean for him. He never asked who she was messaging. He already knew. Lily believed she was untouchable. She believed her beauty, her confidence, her curated image of perfection could shield her from consequence. And why wouldn't she? Her whole life, the world had rewarded her for appearances. Evan understood that better than anyone. He knew the mask she wore because he had once fallen in love with it. Now, he let her keep wearing it. He made sure she felt safe, adored, unstoppable. He held doors, laughed at her stories, even complimented her new dresses. Because the more secure she felt, The more reckless she became, her mistakes multiplied. Secret meetings left digital trails. Bank withdrawals formed patterns. Each cover-up, another move on a chessboard. She didn't realize he'd already mapped. There's a certain power in knowing more than the person trying to deceive you. It's not triumph, it's control. Acquiesce. Steady control that turns emotion into advantage. Evan's nights grew longer. But his heart grew lighter. Not because he stopped caring, but because he stopped reacting. He no longer needed to win her back, only to understand the truth well enough to never let it touch him again. Tom Reeves handled the logistics. Every document, every time-stamped email, every financial discrepancy was stored securely. Together, they built a timeline not just of betrayal, but of intention, because intention, in court and in life, changes everything. Meanwhile, Lily was planning her grand finale. She whispered to friends about freedom. She laughed too loudly at dinners. She posted pictures online with captions about new beginnings. She believed she was orchestrating her escape. Avon just smiled. He knew what was coming. He had already sealed his assets, pre-filed his trusts, and ensured that when she finally pulled the trigger, there would be nothing left for her to hit. To everyone else, they were still the perfect couple, the brilliant engineer and the glamorous wife, smiling on magazine covers and charity galas. But behind that polished facade, they were already two ghosts sharing a house built on lies. Late one night, Evan stood on the balcony, staring at the skyline. The same city that once reflected his success now mirrored something else: clarity. He wasn't a man consumed by heartbreak anymore. He was a man refining the lesson inside it. She thought silence meant weakness, he said under his breath. But silence was just the sound of strategy. And when the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of her laughter from another room, he smiled faintly to himself. When she made her move, he whispered, "I was already 10 steps ahead." Every story of deceit ends the same way, with silence, giving birth to truth. 3 months after that quiet night on the balcony, the silence broke. The divorce hearing had drawn the kind of attention neither of them wanted. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters whispered headlines, and flashes cut through the morning light like judgment. The world smelled blood, and Lily Summers had made herself the perfect headline. Inside the courtroom, she played her role flawlessly. Her voice was soft, wounded, measured. She spoke of neglect, of loneliness, of emotional abandonment. Her lawyers painted her as the selfless wife, the woman who gave her all to a man too consumed by success to see her pain. They presented photos of vacations, romantic dinners, and text messages pulled out of context. Each exhibit a performance, each smile now repurposed as evidence of suffering. It was theater dressed as testimony, and for a while, it worked. The crowd murmured with sympathy. The cameras captured her every practiced tear. And through it all, Avon sat still, hands folded, eyes calm. He didn't frown. He didn't flinch. He simply waited. Then, when the performance reached its peak, Tom Reeves rose. No theatrics, no outrage, just quiet confidence. He began with a simple statement, "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to submit new evidence into record." A single folder, thin, unassuming, but heavy with truth. Inside were the emails between Lily and Eric Dawson, the detailed plan to fabricate emotional neglect, the $500 million demand, even the exact language she'd use in court. Every lie written in her own words. The room fell still. The judge read the lines aloud. And with each word, Lily's expression changed. First, confusion. then disbelief. And finally, fear. Next came the financial records, unexplained cash withdrawals, payments to shell accounts, receipts from law firms and luxury stores tied to her name. Every trail led to the same conclusion. This wasn't heartbreak. It was calculation. The woman who had once charmed the world now watched it turn its gaze on her. Her beauty couldn't soften the blow. Her poise couldn't rewrite the truth. She tried to speak, to explain, to deny, but her own signature stared back from the documents. It wasn't just the judge who saw through her. It was everyone. The reporters, the spectators, even the court officers, all witnesses to the collapse of an image built on manipulation. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was steady, absolute. This court finds evidence of fraudulent intent. The request for settlement is denied. Those words landed like the final nail in a coffin she had built herself. Avon didn't look triumphant. He didn't smile. He simply exhaled slow, quiet, almost merciful. Across the room, Lily sat frozen. Her lips trembled, eyes darting between her lawyers and the floor. The cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing not the fall of a victim, but the unveiling of an architect of deceit. Avon Rosa nodded to the judge and walked out. No grand gestures, no lingering looks, just the calm of a man who had already let go long before the verdict was read. Outside, the noise was deafening questions, lights, shouts. But inside him, everything was silent again. Voiceover. It wasn't revenge. It was truth finally standing up for itself. And in that silence, he found peace, not because he had won, but because he had refused to lose himself while being betrayed. Months passed. The noise faded. The headlines moved on to newer scandals, louder names. But Evan Cole's life had gone quiet again, not the hollow kind of quiet that follows loss, but the stillness that follows acceptance. He had left the courtroom behind, left the penthouse they once shared, and poured his focus into what he had built out of the wreckage, the Cole Foundation for Innovation and Education. Every morning, before sunrise, he arrived at the small office overlooking the city. No assistants, no entourage, just purpose. The same discipline that once built rockets now built futures. Scholarships for kids who dreamed of the sky. Grants for schools that had none. Hope something that couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen. He never spoke publicly about Lily. He never corrected the gossip or defended himself. He didn't need to. The truth had already done that for him. One evening, Tom Reeves stopped by. They sat on the balcony, coffee steaming in the cool air. Tom studied him for a moment and said, "You never spoke badly about her." "Not once." Evan smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "Some wars," he said, "are won by walking away." Tom nodded. They said nothing more. Sometimes peace doesn't need conversation, it just needs distance. As the sun sank behind the city, painting the sky in amber and gold, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not from her, but from the version of himself that needed her. She took my love and tried to turn it into currency. But peace is the only fortune worth keeping. He had learned that revenge ages quickly, but dignity doesn't. He had learned that silence, when chosen, is not weakness, it's power resting. And for the first time in a long time, Evan Cole wasn't chasing anything. Not love, not closure, just purpose. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel, because every week, we tell stories where betrayal meets truth, and where men lose everything only to find what truly matters.